Happy Friday, everyone. On today's show, we talk about a couple NHL streaks, the return of Kris Letang to the ice, plus we look at two teams that have had very different results than expectations this season in the Colorado Avalanche and Montreal Canadiens. Finally, we're going to look ahead to the weekend NHL action.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On NHL podcast for Friday, December 9th. I am Rachel Donner from Locked On Flyers. I'm on Twitter at rmiriam. I'm here each and every Friday with Gil Martin of Locked On Islanders. You can find him on Twitter at IceWarsNYRVSNYI. Thanks for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Plus, we're over on YouTube, so subscribe there as well. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Gil, how are we doing this gorgeous Friday? Well, at least where I am, it's nice out.
Well, it's not bad here either. Yeah, no. Doing well. It's Friday. Always happy to have Friday and to do the show here with you, and looking forward to a great weekend of hockey.
Exactly. Looking back at this week, though, Mitch Marner, man, he's still continuing that streak, 21 games at this point. And I think that, one of the most remarkable things about this streak and it continuing is actually the Leafs shutting out the LA Kings. Like, I just don't want that to get lost in, the discussion about Marner.
Well, it's not what you expect from the Toronto Maple Leafs these days. Most of the time you expect them to win 6-4, that kind of a game. But Ilya Samsonov getting the job done on defense against the LA Kings. And, in the long run, getting shutouts and great defense is probably more important to the Leafs' success than Marner continuing his streak, but the streak is very, very impressive.
It is, and there's only two other active players that have had a streak like this before, Patrick Kane and Sidney Crosby, which that's pretty good company.
Yeah, pretty elite company right there. And Marner, the one thing you love about a streak like this, it shows consistency. It shows that he's there game in and game out, playing at a very high level, and that definitely benefits the Toronto Maple Leafs and has a lot to say about Mitch Marner and how good he is right now.
Yeah, I think so too. And, he's such a core part of this Toronto Maple Leafs team. And I think, you talk about Austin Matthews as well. And it's like kind of as those two go the Leafs offensively. I think that, it's very important for those two to be performing well. But, obviously we know their history and it's like the defensive side of things that has failed them in the playoffs thus far. But, I think that them playing well and Marner specifically is a good thing for the Leafs at this point in the season, just having something to keep them going, and motivate them. I think, as a team, I would want to support this streak and keep it going.
Yeah, absolutely. That is vital. And, the other amazing thing is that Toronto, right now, only 3 points behind Boston. Now, Boston has 3 games in hand, but it's Boston and Toronto, and then, a pretty big drop in points to everyone else in the Atlantic right now.
Yeah. So, for Leafs fans, I certainly hope this continues and they get the playoff victories that they deserve, but enjoy it for now and have fun with this streak, however long it lasts. I want to talk about a lesser streak. Well, I guess it's not lesser in the grand scheme of things, but I think, you talk about backup goaltenders and, it's a very difficult role again, because you often get put into games that you hadn't anticipated playing. I know that's their job, but And then sometimes, they have to play in back-to-backs in very difficult situations. And one of the guys that I've just, and I'm kind of biased because he spent some time with the Flyers, but Brian Elliott is just one of those amazing, he just does his job kind of guys. And he's so lovely as a person and genuine, and you just want good things for him. And the fact that he has, 6 wins in a row as a backup goaltender for the Tampa Bay Lightning, who obviously Vasilevsky is their shining star goaltender, but for them to have a guy like Brian Elliott, who I know can put together incredible goaltending games, to have him win 6 games in a row, his longest win streak in 5 years, I'm just so happy for him.
Yeah, me too. And here's a guy who's 37 years old. You mentioned he's not going to get to play a lot. This 6-game win streak actually started on October 22nd. So that tells you how spread out some of his appearances are. And it's very difficult to stay sharp when you go that long, 10 games in between, 10 days in between games, 13 games in between games. And to have to come on and be sharp in those situations, not easy. To put together a 6-game winning streak and be that consistent when you're not playing very often, that's a challenge, and it's sort of a unique skill that not every goaltender possesses. Some goalies need the work in order to stay sharp, and to have Brian Elliott be able to come on and play every third or fourth game and give the team quality starts each time he goes out there, that is huge for a team like the Tampa Bay Lightning.
Yeah, I think all the kudos in the world to him. Just a really remarkable guy, and I'm glad he's still doing it at 37.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
very good to see.
Another guy that I'm glad is still doing it is Kris Letang, and it's a really difficult thing to talk about. This stroke that he had 10 days ago, and he's already skating again. And according to his doctors and the team, and from what we've heard, he's recovered from this stroke much more quickly than his previous one. And he's still day to day. There's not word that he's going to enter a game anytime soon, but the fact that he's been on the ice and at practice is pretty remarkable. And it's just, to me, I feel like we have to balance this conversation between a professional athlete who has experience with this medical condition and a team of doctors versus, your average person who has a stroke. Like, I just don't want to put expectations on average people who have strokes to recover like Kris Letang has.
Well, yeah, no, no, and the average person is not a professional athlete who has, doctors watching him constantly and who is in peak physical condition. And it does seem very soon. It's great to see him back on the ice. To me, the biggest thing is his long-term health.
Right.
And that's what the Penguins and the doctors and Kris Letang have to do their best to make sure that that is the priority rather than getting him back on the ice quickly. It's to make sure that he doesn't have another stroke and we don't go down this road again. But it's an encouraging sign for sure to see that he's skating again and on the road to recovery.
Yeah, and he's pretty much said that himself, right? That his family, his life outside of hockey is more important, and whatever path he goes on is the path he's going to take, and he's okay with it. That he recognizes that bigger picture. So all of that is really good to see. Again, with him back on the ice, I think that's really encouraging for him and for the Penguins, and it's one of those stories you just love to see.
Yeah, and certainly we wish him a complete and speedy recovery.
Indeed. All right, we're gonna switch gears up next and talk about a couple of teams that have had different results than expectations, with reason. But I think there's really a good conversation to be had there, and we will do that coming up next.
But first, today's episode is brought to you by your friends at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. from football to basketball, World Cup soccer, the NHL, and even esports. We've got it all at betonline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you could find those at BetOnline as well. We're the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. Maybe you want to turn your knowledge of the NHL into an opportunity to make some money. You can head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts.
Gil, I think there's, a couple of teams that have been talked about recently in terms of differing results than expectations. One of them is the Colorado Avalanche and the other is the Montreal Canadiens. And there are some overlapping things to talk about here with injuries, and that you look at the Avs and, their lineup right now looks a lot different than what you would have expected at the beginning of the season, just because it seems like everybody's out. And you have like Alex Newhook, who started maybe on the third line earlier this season, is now getting top line minutes just because, Landeskog is out and McKinnon is out. And it's just been a cavalcade of injuries. And so it's hard to put Stanley Cup champion expectations on a team like this. While you look over at Montreal, they had some injuries too to start the season, especially on the defensive side of things. And they were in the conversation preseason, in the tank for Bedard kind of sweepstakes. And, they're above 500 right now. They got a couple of those guys back, and, they're not like the greatest team in the NHL, but they are outperforming expectations.
By far. I mean, we expected them to be near the bottom of the league. The fact that they are 13, 11, and 2 at this point is impressive, and kudos to Martin St. Louis and the job he's doing there. Their goal differential is still a -12, which tells me that they're getting blown out in some games and maybe winning more close games. But their road record is better than their home record right now. And over the last, 10, 15 games, they're very stable. So I think, anything they do right now is a bonus, but it looks like, as of now, that the Canadiens' rebuild is ahead of schedule.
Yeah, it's they haven't been without some controversy in terms of how they've dealt with Slavkovsky entering the league and, getting called up, getting sent down and things like that. But I think that it's a really good thing to see that they have decided to win as many games as possible, and that they're doing this rebuild, I think, in the right way, where they're making really good decisions for the team in not just the short term, but the medium term and the longer term, to build a successful franchise. And they're winning games, and I think that builds confidence within a team. And I think that is the right approach to a rebuild. Right? You have a coach that tries to get the most out of their players, and you have some success on the ice to build on. And I think, they've already got like really good draft picks in the system, right? I think that it'll be good for them to get good draft picks, which next year is a very, deep draft. So they're going to get somebody good no matter where they're going to end up. So I think they're in such a really primed position to, end the season strong and do well next year.
They are. And the thing you want to do in your rebuild, if you can establish a winning culture in the locker room while you're rebuilding, I mean, that's ideal. And I think that that's what Martin St. Louis is trying to do. The players are responding as of right now. And it's great to see. So, as far as Montreal is concerned, they are definitely one of the bigger pleasant surprises early on this season. Whereas in Colorado, I mean, they've got 8 players on the injured list right now.
It's brutal.
Yeah, it is brutal. They're fielding, a large portion of their AHL team on a game in, game out basis. I mean, that's more than a third of your lineup missing. You're missing the leadership of Landeskog, the offense that Nichushkin and McKinnon and Helm can give you. It is a very difficult situation in Colorado. And amazingly enough, if the season ended today, Colorado would be on the outside looking in as far as the Western Conference playoff situation is. Now they have a few games in hand. They're not far off the pace, but if I would have told you that October 1st, I think a lot of people wouldn't have believed it.
Yeah, and it just goes to show you that, while organizational depth is key to winning a Stanley Cup eventually, right? Because you need that support throughout the regular season. Like there is a line where it gets to be too much at a certain point, right? That you can't withstand everything. Now, I think they're still pretty solid as it goes on the defensive side of things. I mean, Cale Makar is still playing, Taves is still playing, and Gerard is good. So I think that there is room for hope here with the Avs, but I just think that in some ways, hopefully, they're getting this over with now, and that later in the season they'll get some of these guys back and they'll be able to peak at the right time. But just it has been absolutely devastating for the Stanley Cup champion team.
It has been. Now, you look at the talent on this roster. If they even get 3 or 4 of these players back and make the playoffs, they are a dangerous team that you don't want to mess with. But wow, nobody would have expected that this far into the season that the Colorado Avalanche would be in 4th place in their division and only be 3 games over NHL 500.
Yeah, I mean, oof, I don't know, man. It's it is it is really difficult to, even figure out how to talk about this team sometimes, just because you look at the names and you're like, I don't even recognize any of them, right? But I do think that when you're in this kind of situation, it's very next man up. It's very, we're going to get through this, and you do the best you can, and hopefully it builds the character you need for, like I said, when things come back together for a long playoff run, and you have, sort of the cavalry come in in your return players. But and then it just feels like the exact opposite for Montreal, that they got their players back already that were injured, or the key players, and guys that have turned out to be the key players. And, you look at Matheson and Joel Edmondson, who missed a little bit of time earlier in the season, and then they're coming back, and they're really helping out the team, and I think providing a lot of that support that the Canadians have needed in order to win a few more games than expected.
Yeah, and it makes a big difference. When you have your regular lineup available, it really helps. And then obviously you got your Cole Caulfields, who's just been playing so well, and Nick Suzuki. And there is a lot of talent on this team. Some of it is young, but to see them ahead of schedule like this is encouraging. And like you said, being healthy is a part of it, even though they're still dealing with, some players who are out of that lineup.
Yeah, and I just, I think both of these teams are impressive in their own way, just because of dealing with adversity and dealing with a rebuild. I think there are some comparisons there to be made, because when you're in a rebuild, you're in a situation where it's going to be a struggle night in and night out. And it's the same when you're depleted with injuries, right? Because it feels like a rebuild, because you have a lot of younger, inexperienced guys taking on roles that they would not have expected in the
Yeah.
lineup. And I think that's where you kind of look at these teams, and you can see where some of the resiliency that they could build would be the same.
Absolutely. And then, the other thing is you have guys in roles that they don't expect to take on, or maybe not for another year or two to take on. And
Right.
then you don't have the chemistry with your lines that you're used to, because the lines are probably shifting game in and game out because of all the injuries. And that can create a chemistry issue on a team.
It can. Certainly hope for the best for both of these teams and their fans moving forward. We are going to preview some of the NHL games happening this weekend coming up next. Gil, it's been an odd week schedule wise, but we're going to do our best to get through this weekend's games. Last night, a very slow schedule. Usually Thursday has a whole bunch of games. There were only 5. Similarly, this Friday is a little bit uh, heavier on the schedule, and then Saturday is light. So I don't know if it was building availability, but we're going to get into this week's NHL schedule. And your Islanders actually are of interest to me tonight, facing the New Jersey Devils.
Yeah, this is the beginning of a very difficult schedule for the Islanders. They have the Devils, the Hurricanes, and then it just gets, and then Boston. The next 6 games, 5 of them are against some of the elite teams in this league, and the Islanders have lost 3 out of their last 4. So it is critical for them. This is sort of a crossroads point in the schedule between now and the holiday break.
Yeah, I think that'll be a fun one to watch, from a Metro Division rival. Just like, let's watch these two teams destroy each other, shall we? One of the other interesting things happening this weekend is we've got a home and home with the Pens and Sabres. And so Friday night it's at Buffalo, and Saturday it's in Pittsburgh. It's a quick trip between those two cities. So looking to get some more playoffy atmosphere when you have a back-to-back like that, home and home. And, the Pens are obviously playing really well these days overall, and Sabres have had some really strong success. Obviously, Tage Thompson was the big story of the week in his success this season. And so I want to see these teams back to back. I think, watching both of them will be a good experience.
Absolutely, and I love back to back. That's what they used to do in the days of the original 6. They used to, even the 2 teams would travel by train to the games. To the home and home venues. It does create bad blood. It creates more intensity, and as you said, more of a playoff atmosphere. And the Sabres, they got off to a great start, then struggled. They seem to be stabilizing a little bit more, and they're going to be an interesting team to watch as the season progresses.
Absolutely. I think one of the other matchups I'm intrigued by is Seattle at Washington. I think when Washington is a team that has struggled a little bit and have fallen a little below expectation maybe this season. And Seattle is a hot team from the West. They're still in second place in the division at this point, and just they're a younger, hungrier team, and to come in against sort of the senior team of the league be a fun combo.
Yeah, that'll be a good one, and East Coast trip for the Kraken. For some reason, it's always tougher, seemingly, for West Coast teams to go east than for East Coast teams to travel to the West Coast. The travel is a little bit tougher. Let's see how the Kraken handle it.
Absolutely. Any other Friday games pique your interest?
I think the Rangers and Avalanche will be interesting. 2 teams that are struggling a little bit more than most people expected. And we've talked about Colorado and the New York Rangers kind of on shaky ground recently, but not that far out of it in the Metropolitan. And then, of course, we have your Flyers in Vegas tonight.
Yeah, that's going to be a wild one, I think.
You're brimming with confidence. I can see it.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because the Flyers have been playing better for the most part over the last couple of games, but the results aren't necessarily there from a score perspective because they can't score goals. It's the defensive side of things that are improving, and you can really see that. At one point they held the New Jersey Devils to 16 solid minutes without a shot on goal. recently,
Wow.
which is pretty incredible, right?
Yeah.
But, they can't score. So we'll see how this one turns out against a team that can score goals in
Well, they're halfway
Vegas.
there, right? I mean,
Right. So, yeah, there's that. On Saturday, again, interesting schedule. We have that, yeah, obviously that second half of the back-to-back with Sabres Pens. The other big game for me is Florida at Tampa. Always love to see that Florida battle go on.
yeah, that's always a great rivalry. And Florida, we've discussed that team before. So much turnover after winning the President's Trophy last year. Maybe they would need a little time to develop team chemistry and get used to all the roster turnover. I think they're starting to find ways to win more hockey games, and always great to see those two Florida teams go at it.
Yeah, the only late game on Saturday is Minnesota at Vancouver. Minnesota will be on the second half of a back-to-back. They were in Edmonton tonight, so it may be a difficult one for them with the Canucks playing a little bit better than they had before. And Minnesota has been, I think, really hit or miss recently, and they've struggled to like hold on to leads. They're making mistakes, and I think this is a really good opportunity for them to either right the ship or for the Canucks to continue trending in the right direction for them. And I think that'll be a really good game to watch to get a barometer on these two teams.
Absolutely. And, the Canucks are back to NHL 500. And after their very, very slow start, that is an impressive turnaround for this team. But, the problem is you need to go on like long streaks to get back to 500. Now you need to keep going in order to get back into the playoff hunt.
Yeah, I think that'll be huge. Sunday, Boston at Vegas is where it's at, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's the last game of the night, and it is one heck of a matchup. Boston heading out to Sin City, and look, 21-3-1. The Bruins have just been spectacular early on this season, and Vegas has played exceptionally well. I'm looking forward to seeing those two teams go head to head.
Me as well. I think, you know, Seattle at Florida should be another good game that day. Seattle continuing that East Coast road trip. Florida will be coming off that game against Tampa the day before, so they could be pretty exhausted at that point. And I think that'll be a fun one to watch as well. But again, so much good action in the NHL this upcoming weekend. And hopefully we can watch as much of it as possible. That will do it for today's show. Thanks so much for listening. Gil will be back Monday with his show, checking in on NHL teams with hosts from around the league. And of course, we'll both be back next Friday to recap the week that was and look ahead to next weekend's slate of games. Thanks so much again for listening. Have a great weekend. You made us your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available wherever you get your podcasts.